Hello and welcome back. We're going to talk about InDesign today. Way back when, I was pretty good with Quark, but I was never a huge fan of it, and I was really relieved when Adobe came out with InDesign. However, I will let you in on a secret, which is that I know much less about InDesign than I do Illustrator and Photoshop. However, I am not going to let you down. Not only am I going to tell you about all the things that I do know about working efficiently in InDesign, I've done a great deal of research on all kinds of amazing new tips that I didn't know about InDesign. Hold on a second. First things first. Okay, so the first thing, of course, that we're going to talk about is your screen setup. So, as usual, the first thing I'm going to show you is my dual monitor setup. And this is what you would see on my laptop screen. And as you can see, we've got the pages palette as tall as it can possibly go. In InDesign, I use pages in much in the same way I do Photoshop, or at least in terms of number. Layers don't use so much in InDesign. Here, just as an Illustrator, my typical setup will basically just be background, foreground for my layers. And then, links are obviously really important. Characters, the glyphs panel, same as in Illustrator, we want that to be nice and big so we can get to them very easily. I actually only just noticed this recently used area, which I'm wishing I had noticed was there on the most recent project I did in InDesign, where I was frequently using, guess what, the reserved symbol, the trademark symbol, the heart symbol, and a couple of these special glyphs. And of course, as usual, here's my main monitor setup. We've got all the screen real estate dedicated basically to the canvas itself, with only the most minimal tools surrounding it. So moving on, here is my single monitor setup. I'm going to create a blank document here. I'm not a huge fan of these guides and rulers. So, same kind of deal. We still want the pages, I still want the pages palette to be very tall. And everything else is just kind of, sized and placed in the way that seems to be optimal for the way that I work. Nothing else to say about that, I don't think. So let's move on to modifier keys. Now, the first thing I want to show you with modifier keys is this rather clever little addition that Adobe has made for InDesign, and I don't know why they haven't added this to their other apps, and that is the Tool Hints panel. You'll see here that every time we have a tool selected, it's going to give you hints. It's going to tell you about that tool's use, and it's going to tell you about what the modifier keys will do for that particular tool. So that comes in really handy. Okay, so moving on. Here's the first thing I'm going to show you, which is a handy tool, and that is the ability to move the canvas while you have live text selected, while you're editing live text. It used to be that the way to do this would be to hold the command key down and then hit the space bar and then let go of the command key, and then it would give you your hand tool. That's the way it works in Illustrator, but that does not work anymore in InDesign. The way it works now is you use the Option key, which is easier to do. The only thing that's annoying is just that it's not part of the typical navigation structure. Now, this probably goes without saying, but most of your typical navigation tools, such as Command Space to zoom in and using the space bar to move around, those types of things are generally the same here as they are in Illustrator and Photoshop. Okay, so I don't do a whole lot of drawing with the pen tool in InDesign. Just as in Illustrator, you can temporarily get to one of your selection tools by holding the command key down. And similarly, you can also temporarily get to your convert anchor point tool, or I think they call it something else in InDesign, by holding the Option key down, which of course, lets you move handlebars. Now, I don't personally feel like I have a huge amount of use for this because it's kind of like the scrubby zoom feature that I don't like in Photoshop. But if you hold down the Option key while you use your mouse wheel, you'll find that it will quickly zoom you in and out of your document. Same thing goes for using the two fingers on your trackpad of your laptop. Now, when you're in the habit of creating a character or paragraph style, using the Option key while you hit the new icon for that style will bring up the options dialog for that style, rather than just creating an unnamed style based on those parameters. Note that another use for the Option key with regard to the styles palette is to force the selection to be 100% that style. So here, over here, you'll see that there's a little plus appearing beside the paragraph. That's because we have the red text in this otherwise basic paragraph block. If we just hold down the Option key and click that, you'll see that the red text goes away because it's forcing that entire paragraph to adhere to that style. Now this trick is kind of similar to taking screen captures with the default OS X hotkeys, and that is that when you're drawing a box of any kind in InDesign, you can hold down the space key as you're drawing to move that box around, then you let go of the space key and you can continue drawing. Here's another trick that can come in handy, which is that if you have the eyedropper tool, if you hold down the Shift key, it will only pull the color attributes of the object that you're pointing at, rather than all of the effects. You'll see if we switch away and come back that if we don't use the Shift key, then we also take on the shadow of the object that we're pulling from. I am very happy to report that using Control to override the snapping behavior works in InDesign as well. As you'll see here, if we don't have the Control key down, then we get all kinds of guides and it snaps to them. If we hold down the Control key, they go away. No more snapping behavior. Now here's kind of a random trick. You notice this little crosshair icon that appears at the upper left of the ruler. That's typically used to set the origin point, the 0, for the page or document that you're looking at. However, if you hold the Command key down while you click that, then what it's actually going to do is it's going to lay down both horizontal and vertical guides at that spot. Okay, well that does it for the modifier keys that I would deem to be the most important for general design work. Let's move on now to the single key commands, starting with drawing tools. Now, in this case, just as with Illustrator, if you use, when you have an object selected, use the plus or minus key, you can immediately switch to the add and subtract anchor point tool. And similar to Illustrator, you can use the D key to switch to default color chip setups. However, in this case, you're not switching to white per se, because in InDesign, white is typically the paper color. But in any case, it makes the foreground transparent and the background black. And similarly, you use X to switch which color is being focused, foreground and background. And you use Shift X to actually reverse the two color chips. Now, one addition from Illustrator is the fact that in addition to focusing on the foreground and background, within InDesign we can also focus specifically on the text of a given text frame. So in order to do that very easily with a single key, the default, typically when you grab a text frame, it's going to assume that whatever color you select is intended for the background or foreground of the box. But if you want to quickly switch to to focus on the text itself, just hit the J key, and then when you change your color, you'll see that it changes the text instead of the frame. And lastly, you can toggle the preview and normal window modes by hitting the W key. Okay, let's talk about text editing. Now, as you might expect, most of the keyboard commands that you're used to in Illustrator and Photoshop and many other Adobe applications work here as well, such as using Option left and right to adjust kerning or tracking, and using Option up and down to adjust leading. But one key command that I really like that appears in InDesign that does not appear in the other applications is the ability to quickly employ bold or italic text using Command-Shift-B and Command-Shift-I. Another little trick that I forgot to mention in the Illustrator module that also applies here is the ability to use Command up and down arrow to jump between paragraphs. And as you might expect, if you hold the Shift key while you do that, then you will select those paragraphs. Now, one additional text editing hotkey that I have neglected to mention in Photoshop and Illustrator, even though it applies to them just as well as it does here, and I think that's because I tend to assume that most designers already know this, but just to make sure that you're clear on this, in almost all Adobe apps, if you hit Command-Shift-R, you will flush right. If you hit Command-Shift-L, you'll flush left, and if you hit Command-Shift-C, you'll center your text. If you have a text frame that's significantly larger than the text inside it and you want to fit the text frame to the text, just hit Command Option C. To quickly bring up the frame options for a text block, such as when you need to change the number of columns, that sort of thing, just hit Command B. Just as with Illustrator, use Command Shift T to bring up the tab ruler. Another one that can come in handy is if you have a text selection and you want to change the font really quickly, just hit Command 6 and you'll see that it will highlight the font options box. Another text manipulation trick, if you have threaded text between two text frames, you can jump between them. You can jump through the sequence of text frames by using Command Option Page Up and Page Down. Okay, moving on from the type-based commands, if you'd like to quickly zoom in to your selection, all you have to do is hit Command Option equals. Anyone who does a lot of InDesign work probably already knows these two, but you can hit Command E to export a PDF, and you can hit Command D to place a document. Now, the default key to show and hide frame edges, of which I am not a particular fan, is Control Command H, and that's fine, as usual. But here again, to me, the obvious key, based on my own usage, is just reassigning that to F1. So once again, I can easily turn these things on and off really quickly with F1. So that makes a nice segue into custom commands. So one of the things that I find myself doing on a pretty frequent basis is somewhat similar to the way that you use Command Y in Illustrator to flip between the outline mode and the full color mode. Here in InDesign, we will often have a need to switch between the low quality mode and the high quality mode. Now, the default keys to switch between high quality and fast display, and I actually had to write these down because they're so absurdly complex, are Control Option Command H for high quality display and Option Shift Command Z for fast display. That makes a lot of sense. So what made more sense to me was to leverage my knowledge of Illustrator to set those keys to Command Y for the fast display, which is somewhat similar to the outline mode in Illustrator, of which there is no mode in InDesign, and then Command Option Y to set the high quality display. The only other custom command that I have to suggest is setting a key for the guides, which here again, a lot of times if you're trying to evaluate your design, you're probably not going to want to see those guides, but other times you really need them. So here again, just as I have with Illustrator, I've attached that to my F3 key so that I can easily flip those on and off. Okay, so let's move on to actions. There are no actions. InDesign does not use actions, it uses scripting. Scripting has a con, which is that it is more complex than actions, and it does not as easily simply just record what you're doing and then replay it for you. But it has the advantage of being more powerful. Scripting can do a lot more things than actions can, including things that have to do with the operating system outside of the application. All that said, I don't know anything about scripting in this context, so I can't tell you anything specific about that. However, there are tons of resources out there to learn about using scripting to your advantage. If you do a lot of heavy work in InDesign, then it would probably be worth doing some research in this regard because there's all kinds of things that you can automate. Now, one thing that I am going to show you is a very handy and free script that you can download using the link right there down below here, below the video. It's made by a company called Rorohiko, which is a company that specializes in InDesign time-saving extensions and workflow solutions for InDesign. It's called Text Stitch, one word. And all it does is it logically sets the text flow between a number of text frames in your document. And it can do that either just on a page or spread level or throughout the entire document. So as you'll see here, I have 3 text frames, and these are not currently linked. But if we go up here to this menu that installing Text Stitch adds, and we say Text Stitch Auto Stitch, and say OK, you'll see, well, you can't really see, but I promise you that these 3 text frames are now linked in a logical fashion. It's going to either try to go left or right or top to bottom in order to have those things logically linked together. Okay, let's move along to tool presets. Once again, just as with Illustrator, we don't actually have tool presets per se. You do still have occasionally, have your similar double click ability with some of these tools in order to do numerical manipulations, but you do not have tool presets. But again, just as with Illustrator, we have character, paragraph, and object styles. Now, I already mentioned the use of the Option key in order to force a text frame to completely adhere to whichever style you're clicking on. The only other trick I'm going to tell you is, in case you weren't aware of this, is that if you have a given style, you'll see this shortcut field that you can use pretty much any key combination with the exception of the control key, apparently, along with your number pad keys in order to set an easy shortcut for that style, whatever the case may be. Once that's set, when you have whatever it is that you have selected, if it's an object or a chunk of text or a text frame or whatever, and you use that hotkey, then it will instantly set that selection to the style in question. So that makes a pretty nice segue into the odds and ends section. And I'm going to follow what I just told you with a recommendation that if you tend to work on large documents that have a lot of repeated blocks of text that have similar styles that have sort of sequential styling. So you have, for example, header, subheader, main paragraph, and price area or something to that effect, and it always appears in that same sequence. You can actually set that up in InDesign to be completely automated, so that you essentially just select the entire text frame and click click one style, and it will apply all of those styles at once in sequence. So I'm including the link to that down below, and I highly recommend that you check it out. I don't currently have a project for which this applies, but you can guarantee that when I do have such a project, I will be going back to that tutorial and fully learning this process that I'm sure I will forget if I try to learn it now and apply it later. Moving right along. If you have an object that has effects that you want to apply to other objects, but you don't want to bother creating an object style, perhaps because the case is just too small, you don't have enough of those objects, all you have to do is select the first one that has the effect in question, and then you'll see in the actual effects panel or palette, you can actually drag the effects icon to the object in question, and lo and behold, it will have the effects in question. Now, if you have text that is styled in a particular way that it makes it a little bit difficult to work with directly, to edit it directly, let's say, for example, that you have text that has a really high baseline setting, which makes it really annoying to try to click, because you kind of have to click down here in order, you're actually grabbing the text up here, but because the baseline is shifted so high, the actual selection area is here. So when that happens, all you need to do is go under the Edit menu and choose Edit in Story Editor, and you'll see that it gives you a totally black and white version of your text. So if I add text here, then it will add that text to the actual block that's selected. Here's another tip that a lot of designers will already know. If you have a bitmap or any kind of placed document, if you hold down the Option key when you double click it, it will open that document in its default editor. In this case, it's Photoshop because it's a bitmap. Another random tip, if you right-click on your ruler, you'll see that one of the options here is Delete All Guides on Spread. That can come in handy if for any reason you just have a lot of guides and you just don't feel like you need them anymore. Now, for the sake of time, another tip that I'm going to point you to rather than tell you all about is going to tell you how to set your default swatches and styles to be permanently set to a particular brand guide. So for example, if you are working as a designer for a particular company all the time, then it can be really advantageous to just have that company's brand specific Pantone colors or whatever the case may be always be coming up by default in your documents. So that's something that can be done fairly easily, but again, I'm not going to go through all the steps here. Just look down below for that quick tip. Now, in a somewhat similar vein, if you also have a number of text phrases, any kind of string of text such as a postal address, a web address, that you find yourself having to paste on a very frequent basis. Now, first of all, I will say that if in the previous module you got interested in system-wide macros, that is actually the most appropriate place to do that, because with a system-wide macro, you can actually just set a hotkey that will work anywhere, and you can type that address any place. And I can show you, for example, this is my company's URL that I just typed with the hotkey that I know. Or I can type my home address, I can type the current date. I can do that with system-wide hotkey anywhere I want. However, if you're not quite to that level, if you haven't messed with macros yet, you can actually do that type of operation from within InDesign by reworking a tool that they didn't really intend for that purpose, and that is to use the autocorrect preferences here. So if you turn on Enable Autocorrect, and then you click the Add button, then you'll see that you can set a misspelled word. So in this case, let's say that we wanted to be able to type the address of the company that we work for on a really easy basis. So if we type ADR right there, and then we actually type in the address, let's say it's 1234 Road Street, and then we hit OK again, we go back to our document. When we type ADR and we hit space, you'll see that it types in the full string of text that we wanted for that abbreviation. That's all we have for InDesign this week. Don't check back in a few months if you don't want to learn new amazing information about InDesign, but do go ahead and go through your action steps that will follow this video, and that's about it. I'll see you in a week.